says it's permitted to wipe over the khuffs and their like with 7 conditions. Being worn after a complete purification with water, concealing the obligatory area, the ability to walk in them customarily, being fixed on their own, their permissibility, being pure, and not revealing the skin. Both the resident and traveler of sin wipe after a hadath, having already worn them for a day and night. The traveler which is not sinful, who shortens, is for 3 days and their nights. If he was to wipe during travel and then settle as a resident and then travel, or doubted when the wiping began, he's not to exceed the wiping of a resident. So this first portion of the chapter here, the Sheikh is talking about the position of the madhhab when it comes to wiping over the socks. So most of us are familiar with the khuff, which is traditionally a leather sock, and this is what is agreed upon by the madhhab, all 4 of them, that you can wipe over the khuff with various conditions to be met. However, the Hanabila, they go a step further from the khuff, and they say anything that resembles it. So it's from mufradat al-madhhab, the very unique qualities of it, that they include any type of sock as well, whether it's from cotton or wool or any permissible material, as long as it meets a number of conditions. And they include with wiping over the sock 4 main things. The khuff is one, al-imama, which is the turban that is worn with it which comes under the neck, or a turban which is worn with a tail that hangs down. A person can wipe over that. The next thing that they permit is wiping over the splint or a cast, a bandage, which we're going to discuss shortly. And then lastly, they permit wiping over the khimar for a woman that is wrapped under her neck, the khimar that is wrapped around like this. They permit that with certain conditions also to be met, similar to what we'll mention here. So he goes and he talks about these 7 conditions. The first of those is that you wear the socks. We'll use socks here because that's what most of us are wearing. We're not wearing leather socks for most situations. So you you wear the socks after having performed a complete purification using water. Right, so after you've made wudu or you've made a ghusl, completely finished, and then you wear the socks. This is the first thing. It has to be done completely, as Sheikh al-Ba'li, he says here, that you can't, for example, wash the right foot and then put the sock on, and then wash the left foot and then put the sock on. But it has to be wash the right and then wash the left to complete the entirety of the purification, the tahara, and then put the socks on in that order. Otherwise, you would have to remove the sock and wash the foot. Remove the right sock and then wash the left foot and then put the right and the left sock on. That's according to the order in which it goes. The next thing is that it covers mahall al-fard, which is the obligatory area. So when you're making wudu, the obligatory area of the foot to be washed is the entirety of the foot, its upper portion, its bottom portion, its heel, including the ankle. So that means the sock has to cover all of that area. Has to cover all of the foot up into and including the ankle. So if you're wearing the small socks which drop down below the ankle, then these socks are not valid to be wiped over. Has to cover the entire portion of that. The next part he says here, the third condition is that they're, he says, إِمْكَانُ الْمَشِّ بِهِمَا عُرْفًا. So that means that you're able to walk in them. Something that you put on your foot and you walk around with it. It doesn't break apart, it doesn't fall apart, it doesn't come off. Right? So something that's walked in. And this is what was understood in the time of the companions by khuff. They understood that the khuff means something which is worn on the foot and something that you can walk in. That's why they say urfan here, according to customarily, meaning the custom of the companions as they understood what the khuff was. The next one is that they are fixed by themselves, meaning they are in place and fixed on the foot without having something tied on them or strapped to them, but they stay there by themselves. The next one he says, ibahatuhuma, that they're permissible. So it's not permitted for you to wipe over socks, for example, that have been stolen. You're not allowed to use the stolen socks and then wipe over them, or for men to wear silk socks and then wipe over them. So if you were wearing silk socks, if we could picture such a scenario, it would not be permissible to wipe over them, even if they met all of the other conditions, because they're not permitted to be worn in the first place. The next thing is that they are pure themselves, meaning the material of it is pure, and it is a pure material in and of itself, and it's pure, the sock. And then it does not reveal the skin. So something which he says here, like transparent, like glass or something plastic or something which you can see the skin. So if you meet those 7 conditions, this is what is allowable to wipe over. Right, so these seven conditions have to be met, and if they're met, then you can begin to wipe over the sock. The time period, he says, that the resident and the traveler whose travel is sinful, not the sinful traveler, but the traveler of sin. So someone that's on a journey, and the journey is sinful. They're going to go and gamble, for example. They're traveling to the casino, or they're traveling to some haram end. He says that they only are to wipe min hadathin ba'da lubsin yawmin, that they can wipe after the hadath, which is, we discussed, what requires wudu. From that moment, you can wipe over the sock for a day, and it's night. So if, for example, you woke up and you got ready for the day and you made wudu and you put your sock on, the time period doesn't start from the time that you put the sock on. But your time period of wiping begins when you make hadith, when you break your wudu. So let's say you maintained your wudu until noon, right? So then you have until Yawm wa layla. You have the day and the entirety of the night to wipe over that sock from the moment that you broke wudu. The next time period he mentions here, he says, the traveler, safara qasrin, the one that travels the distance which is permitted to shorten the prayer. Traveler which is permitted to shorten the prayer, which is approximately 50 miles or 60 miles. They say about 80 kilometers, which is more than that, I think. It's about 50 miles, right? Yeah. So we'll say about 45, 50 miles. That if you have traveled beyond that distance, you're considered a traveler as long as your travel is not sinful. Right? It's a permissible journey. Then you're allowed to wipe over the sock for 3 days with their nights. 3 days with their associated nights. He says, if you are wiping over them, fi safarin thumma aqam. So if you're on a travel, you're traveling, and you are wiping over them for the days that you're allotted, and then you become a resident, thumma aqam. Or you are a resident, and then you begin to travel. So you began wiping over the sock as a resident, and then you began to travel. Or, this is the third case, you are doubtful as to when you began to wipe over them. He says, لَمْ يَزِدْ عَلَى مَسْحِ مُقِيمٍ. You cannot go beyond the period of a resident. So the example of this would be someone that was traveling on a journey. Let's say they're traveling, it's their second day, and they've been wiping over their sock for that period of 2 days. And then they reach their hometown and they become a resident. They're no longer allowed to wipe over the sock. It's only for 1 day, which they've already done. They say, batal al-wudu. Wudu is invalid now. So you have to take the sock off and you have to make wudu again. Or a person that was a resident and then he began a journey. He had already been wiping and then he started the journey at the end of the day perhaps. He's still confined to that 1 day and night because he began wiping over the sock as a resident. And then if you were doubted when you began, then you stick with the residence time period. The last section here he says ويجوز المسح على جبيرة إن كان وضعها على الطهارة ولم يجاوز قدر الحاجة وإن جاوزته أو كان وضعها على غير طهارة وجب نزعها فإن خاف ضررا تيمم مع مسح موضوعة على طهارة مجاوزة محل الحاجة وإن ظهر بعض محل فرض أو حصل ما يوجب الغسل أو انقضت المدة بطل الوضوء. The last part talks about the cast. He says here, it is permitted to wipe over a splint. This is like a wrap, a bandage or something. If it was worn after purification and does not exceed what is necessary. If it does not exceed that, if it does exceed that or was put on while impure, it must be removed. If harm is feared, tayammum is done, coupled with wiping what was placed while pure, which exceeds the site of necessity. So here what that means essentially is that if you have a cast or a bandage that you have to put on a cut or a broken limb, and these are the limbs of wudu of course, not talking about ghusl yet, what to do in that case, but in wudu, if you had a cut, a wound, a burn, or a break, and you had to you had to wrap a bandage or a cast, there's a couple of things. Number one, it has to be put on after a complete tahara, complete purification with water. Number two is it should not exceed the necessary portion of the body. So if you have a cut on your arm here, and the cast or the thing goes all the way up, then a lot of this is excess. If you have something on your hand and it wraps all the way to your elbow, then this is considered excess, not needed to cover the wound. Understand? So then the third question would be, are you able to remove it? Sometimes you may have a wound, you may have a sprain, you have something that they've wrapped, but it's possible for you to remove it. Okay? So if you have, these are the scenarios, if you have a wound, you made wudu, and then you covered your wound with the bandage, you begin to make wudu as you normally would, all of the obligatory body parts, and then when you get to the bandage, you have, with a moist hand, you wipe the entire thing. This is good for you brothers that are in the hospital in case you run into it. You wipe the entire thing with a wet hand. This is different from the sock, because the sock isn't wiped on the top, whereas the bandage is wiped its entirety. That's if it cannot be removed. Right? So then if the portion of it exceeds what is necessary, you make your wudu as you normally would. If your bandage is on your arm here, for example, and it extends down to the wrist, what's necessary, what should be done is the forearm only, exceeds down to the wrist. So you begin to make your wudu. When you get to the portion that you're supposed to wipe over, the necessary part you wipe over completely, and whatever is in excess, you make tayammum for. So you stop at that point, pause your wudu, you make tayammum. And that'll come later, the description of that. You make tayammum, and then you continue in your wudu as you normally would. And that suffices for the bandage, which is required, the tayammum for the excess. Then lastly, if you put the bandage on, but you didn't put it on in a state of purification, tahara, you have it on there, regardless if it's covering the obligatory area or in excess, you can't remove it to make tahara, then you make your wudu as you normally would. You do not wipe over the bandage because it was not worn in a state of purification, but you make tayammum instead. So I wasn't able to make wudu due to the nature of the wound or something like that. I didn't have time, I didn't think about it. Now I have it on, and it would be harmful for me to remove it, to make wudu again, so I leave it on. I make wudu like I normally would. When I get to this portion of washing, I make tayammum for this bandage, and then I continue my wudu, and that suffices for that portion of the bandage. He concludes here, he says, if a portion of an obligatory part is revealed, something which necessitates a ghusl occurs, or the time period expires, so this is three things, the wudu is annulled. Meaning that, if, for example, we have on our socks that we wiped over, and then for some reason we pull the sock down enough that it reveals the obligatory portion. The top of the foot, the heel, the ankles become revealed, wudu is invalidated. Because now we have to wipe over that portion. The next thing he says here, that if something necessitates a ghusl, which is a major impurity, then that's also a no. You can't continue along with that wiping. And then as well, the time period expires. The time period we just talked about for wiping over the socks, 1 day and its night for a resident, and for those that are traveling, but the travel is sinful, 3 days and 3 nights for a traveler beyond the allotted distance, as long as the journey is halal. That is the time period for them. And as for the bandage, there's no time period for that. The time period is whenever the wound heals and the bandage can then be removed.